So now we can start thinking about what determines whether a good or service has an inelastic or elastic demand curve, or what determines the elasticity of a product in general. And so we can think of kind of 4 different determinants of elasticity. The first one we should talk about is the availability of substitutes. So just thinking intuitively, remember elasticity is about the buyer, or price elasticity of demand is about the buyer's sensitivity to changes in price. Well, if there's lots of substitutes for a good, then it's going to be really easy to kind of switch your consumption away from a good that's becoming relatively more expensive towards another good. For instance, if there's a lot of substitutes for butter, such as like margarine or lard or whatever, then maybe the elasticity for butter would be low. The butter would be relatively elastic if you consider butter having lots of close substitutes. So the more substitutes, the less, or I'll say even the more sensitive buyers are to changes in price. Right, and that kind of intuitively makes sense. If the price of something goes up and there's lots of other things you could purchase or use instead of it, you're going to really start purchasing those other things quickly, even with a small price change. But if there's something that doesn't have many close substitutes, something like insulin or something like that, no matter what the price change here, people are still going to need to buy that. So that if there's no close substitutes, it's going to be relatively inelastic. So the second determination of elasticity for a product that we're going to talk about is whether this good is a necessity or a luxury good. And so usually we think of things that are necessities. Again, insulin's a great example of this as well, is something that you kind of need to purchase. So like water, kind of basic foods, medicine that some people need to take. Those are necessities. And so if something's a necessity, it's going to be inelastic. People are going to be less sensitive to price changes with goods they need to buy, because they need to buy those goods. So insulin, again, is an example of this. You see prices of insulin skyrocketing and stuff in the States. People still are going to purchase it because the demand for insulin is so inelastic because people need to be able to consume insulin. And for luxury goods, they're going to be relatively elastic. So if we think of something we don't really need to have it, but we might like it, all of a sudden the price of that changes, and we change and purchase something else instead. So maybe this kind of pandemic has really taught us which goods are necessities versus luxuries, right? All right, so number 3, so the third determinant, price elasticity of demand, is how narrowly or broadly the good is defined. So how narrow or broadly the kind of good is defined. So if I gave you 2 different goods, so I give you one good that's clothing. So example, let's use green since it seems to be working better. Clothing versus jeans or something like that. Right? I mean, clothing is a very broadly defined good. It encompasses lots of goods, including jeans. Where jeans is it's more narrowly defined. you're going to think that clothing is going to be inelastic, compared to jeans, right? I mean, this maybe gets to like necessities or whatever again, but if we've defined something very broadly, it's going to mean there's less substitutes, I mean, for that good as well, right? Just because of how we've defined it. There's not many substitutes for clothing, but there's probably many substitutes for jeans, right? There's lots of different kinds of pants that you could wear, or skirts or dresses or whatever. So how narrowly or broadly we define the good is going to contribute to the elasticity of that good. And finally, the time horizon. In general, we think of things are going to be more elastic kind of in the future. So we're forward looking and we're going to think that right now, maybe the demand for gasoline is pretty inelastic, but we think in terms of, if we start to think longer terms in the next 20 or 30 years, the elasticity of gasoline is probably a lot larger, right? People are probably much less sensitive to changes in price of gasoline in the long run, because we probably think there's going to be more substitutes, or if the price of gasoline does continue to go up, it's going to make these alternatives relatively cheaper and cheaper. So these are 4 kind of determinants of price elasticity of demand.